Hey everyone, today we're going to talk about everyone's favorite topic, Heist. Now, some of you might be Heist enjoyers and already know about this. Some of you may have never heard about the strategy before, but I'm going to tell you why rushing to maps and doing maps on the first day of the season is a big mistake for a lot of people. If you're planning to, I would say, semi-try hard to really try hard at the start of the season, and you want the best possible starts that you can have, unless you have a very specialized reason to go directly to mapping. For example, maybe you want to go farm Shaper or Theory or Elder in the first few days of the season and get the drops before anyone else can get them while they're still worth a lot of money. Mapping isn't really the best thing to do. In my opinion, what I think the vast majority of the player base should do if they want the best start possible is you should be heisting the first few days of the season, at least the first day. There are some ways to do infinite heisting, which in some cases might be the correct play. For example, if you're playing a solo Magic Find build, but doing at least a few hours of heist at the start will make you a lot more money than just mapping. Now, why is that? The reason behind that is that most of the items that you get while mapping aren't really worth anything the first few days. If we think about it, who's going to really want to buy your random ancient orb that you found? Or who's going to want to buy your random Gilded Legion Scarab? Or maybe you find some niche unique that isn't very used for many builds that will be worth a lot more later on. A lot of the drops that you're going to find aren't really wanted, at least for the first few days of the season. And the most important thing in the first few days is build enabling uniques that people absolutely need to play their builds, and good rares with life and resistances generally. Because of that, most of the random items and a lot of the currency they're going to find is going to be kind of useless, and it's going to be kind of hard trading for very small amounts of currency since you don't really get to see much until you get to higher end maps where you start juicing. So with that said, you kind of just want to do something that generates you a lot of Chaos Orbs, as that's the main currency of the first few days of the season. And Heist is really, really good at doing that. Per Heist, on average, with this strategy, you should see maybe 1 to 2 chaos on the floor in each contract that you do. That not might sound like a lot, but considering we're going to be doing about 60 contracts or so, that's going to allow you to start the season immediately with anywhere between 100 to 200 chaos, depending on your luck. And also depending if you go a bit further. That's also not including all the extra raw currency that you're going to find alongside that. It's not very unrealistic to walk out of Heist or just heisting for a few hours as well with around 300 chaos worth of total loot for basically no effort. What you could do to increase this by another 20 to 30% or so is you could also be doing the chaos recipe at the same time, where you are vendoring a full set of gear for a chaos recipe. There's a really easy way to do this as well. I will link a tool in the description below that will automatically do the chaos recipe for you by simply highlighting the items in your stash, and you just vendor them as a set. You don't have to do this. I personally didn't do that last season. I don't plan to do it again this season, but if you do want even more money, you can very easily get more money that way. As an example, when I did this last season, I walked out of Heist at the end of the first day of the season with a non-corrupted 6-link and a void battery on top of an extra 30-40 chaos or so that I was able to spend on just getting some pretty decent rare items in every single one of my slots. So let's get into it and talk about how to actually set this up. You can start heisting from Act 6. As soon as you kill basically your first monster, they will drop some rogue markers, which you should immediately take, go back to town, and go to the rogue harbor. Make sure you go to your loot filter and make sure that you see small stacks of rogue markers. Some people will have these hidden, and you can specifically set it to where rogue markers will show up at the start of the game, and then maybe around like level 70 or so, you can have them be hidden. But make sure they are not hidden, otherwise you will lose out on a very large chunk of this strategy. As soon as you come to the harbor, you should go do the introductory quest to unlock the heist locker. This is really important because if you accidentally shift click your rogue markers into your stash, they will go into the heist locker. And if you don't have it unlocked which also unlocks it in your hideout, then you can effectively be locked out of coming back to Rogue Harbor with no rogue markers, and will have to find another drop, or you will have to find a stash in one of the leveling areas to be able to come back. So make sure you don't miss out on that to not accidentally hardlock yourself out of this until the next drop. Once you do that and you have the locker enabled to prevent any sort of messing up, you should come over to the vendor and, using a very specific search, buy all the contracts that are shown. You're looking to buy lockpicking, demolition, and perception contracts, as these, when we run them, give us a very large amount of raw currency and a decent amount of uniques. You can actually have a fairly high chance to find some good uniques here, as heist chests have a abnormally high drop rate of uniques, which hopefully GGG has forgot to touch. So you might be able to see a tier 2 or maybe even a tier 1 unique while you do this, but don't get your hopes up. All these contracts cost 1 Chance Orb. Sometimes they might come pre-crafted a bit, and they might also cost an alchemy, and that is completely fine. We want to absolutely buy all lockpicking, demo, and perception contracts without failure. If you run out of Chance Orbs or you don't have enough, you can always go to town and change your jewelers into fusings and your fusings into Chance Orbs. It is absolutely worth it to do this. The most important thing is you need to buy all these contracts out. What you're going to do from there is, every time you level, this shop resets. So that means you can just keep your markers with you. As soon as you level, just drop a portal, come back here, put the search into the bar at the bottom, and buy everything that's highlighted. You're going to do this every level from the moment you hit Act 6 all the way up to Katava. And at the end, right before you do Katava, you're going to come over here and you're going to run every single contract that you ended up buying all the way up until then. You should have somewhere around 60 or so contracts. This number is going to depend on how lucky you get with what you find in the shop. And feel free to do all the low level ones first or all the high level ones. Do them in any order you'd like. But the goal is to just run them and to make all the raw currency right before we lose our resistances to Katava and we move on to maps. One thing to note, if you do run out of Chance Orbs and you have absolutely no other way of getting them, if you're out of jewelers and fusings as well, run the lockpicking contracts that you have. At least run some of them. You will very often find Chance Orbs in the chests available in lockpicking contracts. You also find fusings and jewelers. So it's not a bad idea to run some if you absolutely have no other way of getting them. And it is completely fine to also just stall your progression in leveling to run a few contracts. This is highly worth it. Running the contracts at the end won't take too long. All of this completely depends on what build you play. Some builds might be able to run all 60 contracts in about an hour and a half, while some builds, mainly minion builds or builds that don't have the best clear or aren't the fastest just immediately, might take upwards to 2 or 3 hours to do this. As a comparison of last season, I played Cold BV and I was able to run through all my contracts in about an hour and a half, while my friend, she played Skelly Mages and it took her about 3-ish hours to run all the contracts. I don't think any build can go slower than that. I think a minion build is probably going to be the slowest, but it's still very much worth your time. When you're doing the contracts, especially for contracts that you are running with Crast, you can pretty much open every single chest in there. One small tip that I can give you is, if there's a chest close to the end where you steal the big reward, you can click on it, trigger lockdown if your alert level is too high, and then quickly rush and pick up the big reward at the end during the lockdown period, as you should have enough time. Make sure you also loot the safes in the room. Those safes have an absurdly high chance of having a Chaos Orb in them. I would say there's maybe a 20 to 30% chance in each safe that there'll be 1C. They're extremely good and they're worth waiting the few extra seconds to see their animation finish through. If you are running contracts with Tibbs, you do want to remember his special ability of him being able to open up an extra chest after lockdown. And what I don't think most people know is that his ability works on the giant chests as well that concur a lot of alert level. So what you can do is steal the big reward, leave a big chest unopened, and then go back and open that big chest to get substantially more loot than you should have been able to get out with. For maybe the first 20 to 30 contracts that you do, you are going to have to get all the way to the end and steal the big prize at the end that you can vendor for rogue markers. This is because we need rogue markers to be able to start the contracts themselves, and doing about the first half of them where you steal it should rack you up enough rogue markers that for the second half of it, you can simply walk in, open all the chests, not even trigger lockdown, or maybe even trigger lockdown and then just walk out. You don't need to go all the way to the end. Obviously, you're going to have to pay attention to your rogue marker stack, and if you skip out on the reward at the end too much, you might get really low on markers, and for the last few, you might have to steal the reward again. Just make sure you don't run out of markers and put yourself in a position where you can't run any more contracts. And that's about it. It's simply just abusing the fact that the contract shop resets every single level, and it allowing you to rack up a very large amount of contracts to do at the end. Even if you hate Heist, I was a really big Heist hater myself, I can very much stomach doing this much Heist. And honestly, this strategy has made me come to new lights on how I feel about Heist and actually start to somewhat enjoy it. Mostly because this gives you so much money early on that the massive increase in wealth that I can have on the first day of the season far outweighs my hatred for the mechanic itself, and actually makes me really enjoy doing it. So I would say if you aren't the best at making money in the first few days, give this a try, even if you hate Heist, and I promise you, you will not regret it. That's about it for this video. I hope you have a good league start. I hope it goes well for you. If you have any questions, I'm going to be streaming every single day of the whole season, and you could always feel free to leave your questions in the comments as well, and I'll be more than happy to answer them for you. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, and I'll see you in the next video.